The water bloomed red under the harsh stadium lights, spreading in slow, haunting ribbons as the crowd fell silent. A woman's scream tore through the air. "She's not coming up," and in that instant, joy turned to horror. Trainers froze on the platform, their whistles useless, while the orca circled below with a force that no one could stop. Jessica's body, limp in the current, drifted just beneath the glass wall, her braid floating upward like a signal lost in the chaos. And then, as if the world itself held its breath, the tank fell eerily still, leaving only questions echoing through the stunned arena. If these moments grip you the way they gripped every witness that day, stay with us and share the story so its weight isn't carried in silence. The morning sun bathed San Diego in a golden haze, and at SeaWorld, the day began like so many before. Families lined the entrance gates, cameras hanging from their necks, sunscreen still sticky on their arms. By the time the stands filled, the air smelled of buttered popcorn, spilled soda, and the faint tang of chlorine drifting from the massive tank at the center of the stage. The turquoise water shimmered beneath the harsh white stadium lights, every ripple bouncing bright reflections across the curved glass walls. From the speakers overhead came soft background music, a steady hum that blended with children's laughter as the announcer's voice promised an unforgettable show. Jessica Radcliffe stood at the edge of the stage, her black wetsuit trimmed in gray, catching the sun as drops of moisture gleamed against the fabric. At 36, she carried herself with a calm that came from years of trust built with the ocean's most formidable predator. Her sandy blonde hair was braided tight against her back, green eyes scanning the crowd before settling on the immense shadow moving beneath the surface. Kaelen, the park's largest male orca, swam slow circles, his dorsal fin towering like a blade above the turquoise water. When he broke the surface, the sound of his exhale was a thunderous whoosh, a blast of mist that sparkled in the light, earning cheers from the crowd. Jessica raised her hand, signaling him forward, her voice carrying firm yet warm through the microphone clipped to her collar. "Let's show them what trust looks like." The audience erupted, clapping as Kaelen surged upward, body arcing high above the stage before crashing back down with a sheet of spray that drenched the first few rows. Children squealed, parents laughed, and for a moment, everything felt as it always had, safe, familiar, full of wonder. Jessica's smile spread wide, her chest lifting with pride. This was her world, the one she had devoted her life to, and for that moment, it felt untouchable. But beneath the applause came a sound that was not planned. A sudden, sharp crack split the air as Kaelen's massive tail struck the surface with violent force. The water churned, slamming against the tank walls, a hollow thud echoing across the stadium. The crowd gasped, some laughing nervously, assuming it was part of the act. Yet a few parents pulled their children closer, their eyes narrowing as if sensing something was off. The smell of chlorine sharpened in the humid air, the mist heavy on the skin. Jessica forced a reassuring smile, tilting her head toward the crowd as though nothing was wrong. Her hand lifted again, steady, commanding Kaelen back into rhythm. But her pulse quickened as she watched him drift lower, slower, his movements less precise than she knew them to be. The tail slap was not choreography. It was something else. A sign, faint but undeniable, that today would not follow the script. The late morning light poured through the open roof of SeaWorld San Diego, bouncing against the glass walls of the massive tank. It should have been dazzling, but Jessica noticed how the water itself seemed darker, less inviting. Kaelen drifted in wide, restless circles, his enormous body cutting through the turquoise like a shadow waiting to break loose. The crowd still clapped, though their enthusiasm faltered, the applause scattered and hesitant. A murmur replaced laughter, like the first whisper of unease passing through the bleachers. Jessica's smile began to tighten. For years, she had learned every nuance of Kaelen's behavior, every rise and dive, every rumble in his chest. This wasn't play. It was hesitation, resistance, something that pulsed against her instincts. She pulled the whistle from her lips, sent out the sharp, high-pitched cue. Kaelen didn't rise as expected. Instead, his shape lingered below, dorsal fin gliding just under the surface, circling her with the precision of a storm cloud closing in. From the stage wings, one of the younger trainers shifted uneasily, headset pressed to his ear. Jessica caught the faint hiss of his voice. Something's off. Another trainer stiffened, her eyes glued to the water, as if bracing for something to emerge. The stadium's sound system buzzed with feedback for half a second, the interruption oddly jarring, enough to still the last of the laughter. Kaelen surfaced suddenly, his blowhole exhaling with a violent blast that boomed across the stage. The noise echoed off the steel and concrete, more like a growl than a breath. A ripple of gasps moved through the audience. A toddler began to cry, the sound sharp against the heavy air. The smell of raw fish clung to the humidity, mixed with the sting of disinfectant that coated Jessica's tongue, making her throat feel dry. Her palm pressed flat to the slick metal railing, the cool dampness grounding her as her chest tightened. The steady calm she had carried into the performance now frayed, replaced by a crawling unease. She searched the crowd, reading their faces confusion, worry, impatience. Parents leaned forward protectively, arms circling their children. She tried to focus on Kaelen, to bring him back into rhythm, but the more she tried, the more distant he seemed. Easy. Boy, she whispered, voice almost lost beneath the hum of the crowd, her green eyes locked on the shifting shape below, her breath shallow. Something was changing between them, something she could feel but couldn't name. The bond, the trust threads she had always believed unbreakable, stretched thin in that moment. Then Kaelen surged upward, breaking the surface in a violent spray. Sheets of water drenched the front rows, sending children into shrieks not of delight but fear. Parents scrambled to pull them back, startled cries mixing with the dripping patter of water off metal bleachers. Jessica flinched, her smile breaking at last. For the first time in years, her eyes flickered with something she had never allowed on that stage before: fear. The murmur of unease spread like a slow wave through the stands, the energy of the stadium shifting from anticipation to dread. Parents clutched their children closer, voices rising above the tinny echo of the speakers that still tried to hold the rhythm of the show. Jessica crouched near the edge of the platform, her wetsuit dripping cold against her skin, every muscle straining to appear calm, even as her heart hammered. She leaned forward, voice steady but sharper now, the whistle's tone urgent as it pierced the humid air. Kaelen. Up, she called, her hand cutting a familiar signal. Nothing. The orca slid beneath the surface, silent but circling tighter, faster, his enormous body leaving trails of turbulence that churned the turquoise water into something darker, unsettled. The dorsal fin cut through the water's top like a blade glinting in sunlight, each pass closer to the stage. Jessica's throat went dry, her breath shallow. Her mind betrayed her, with memories she had fought to bury the incident when Kaelen, years ago, had been kept in a cramped isolation tank, slamming his head against the walls for hours. The day he lunged at a handler during a feeding session, teeth snapping against the metal pole, fury surging from nowhere. Each report she had brushed aside as accidents, misinterpretations, stories twisted by fear. But now those fragments of history came alive in the churn of water before her. The tank roared with sudden violence. Kaelen's body pounded against the glass, the vibration deep, bone-rattling, resonating in the steel beams above. The sound silenced even the announcer, whose practiced cheer faltered mid-sentence. Parents shouted for exits, their voices breaking, while children's cries filled the air like sirens. Security rushed the aisles, their radios crackling orders over the noise. Yet the show did not stop, the bright lights still burned. The microphone still carried static, the illusion of control crumbling in plain view. Jessica's green eyes locked on the mass rising before her. Kaelen broke the surface, water streaming off his jaws, his gaze locked, unblinking. She felt the cool spray of mist hit her face, sharp against her skin, her chest constricting with a pressure that had nothing to do with breath. For a second, time collapsed, the cheers of the crowd in years past, the laughter of children, her own trust in this animal, all of it colliding with the reality in front of her. This was not hesitation. This was not defiance. In that instant, she knew, with a clarity that froze her veins, what swam before her was no routine, no trained gesture. It was a threat, and it had already begun. The stadium lights bore down with merciless intensity, their glare bouncing off the slick stage and the trembling surface of the tank. The air was thick with moisture and fear. Every breath, Jessica drew heavy and metallic with the scent of chlorine and fish. She lifted her hand high, fingers shaking only slightly, her voice cutting through the speaker system, louder and sharper than before. "Stay calm. Everyone stay calm." The crowd quieted only in fragments, parents clutching their children tighter, whispers rising like static through the tiers of bleachers. Somewhere above, an alarm wailed once before faltering, muffled beneath the mounting roar of panic. Along the stage wings, her colleagues scrambled. Emergency buoys were pulled from storage bins, their bright orange plastic gleaming under the harsh lights. One trainer gripped the flotation line so hard his knuckles whitened, his eyes darting between Jessica and the orca's circling form. Another muttered into her headset, voice ragged, "We don't have control. Repeat, we don't have control." Jessica forced her legs to move forward, every step weighted by the slick film of water on the platform. Her chest pounded, heart hammering against her ribs like fists against glass. She stretched her arm toward the tank, signaling again, green eyes narrowed with a determination born of habit and years of training. For a fleeting moment, Kaelen seemed to respond. His pace slowed, the circles widening, the violent churn easing into steady motion. The crowd held its breath. She dared to step closer, her wetsuit clinging uncomfortably against her skin, water dripping into her boots. Her voice carried steady, practiced, the way it had in hundreds of shows before. "Good boy. Easy now. Come on up." She drew on every command, every ounce of calm she could muster, her body a mask of authority while her gut twisted with dread. Then Kaelen vanished. Without warning, his massive body cut downward into the depths. The surface smoothed instantly, glass-like, eerie in its stillness. The entire arena froze. The only sound was the distant hum of the stadium lights and the faint whimper of a child. Jessica leaned forward, straining to see through the reflection of her own face on the tank's glass wall. The silence pressed in, suffocating, until the explosion came. Kaelen erupted from below, his body cleaving the water with terrifying speed. The sound of the impact was a detonation, water bursting upward in violent sheets, drenching the stage and the first rows in a chilling downpour. The shockwave rattled the steel railings, sent spectators stumbling backward. Jessica's body was thrown off balance, slammed hard against the slick platform. Pain shot through her side, the breath knocked out of her. Gasps tore from the crowd, a chorus of screams erupting as panic ripped through the stands. She tried to push herself up, palms slipping against the soaked surface, her braid plastered to her face. The roar of the water drowned out the shouts of her colleagues. Above her, Kaelen's shadow loomed larger than ever, the tank vibrating with his immense power. She looked up, chest heaving, and in that instant, she knew the truth that the audience could not deny any longer. Whatever control she had believed she still held, it was gone. The sun bore down mercilessly on the open-air stadium at SeaWorld San Diego, the glare bouncing off the glass panels of the tank and stabbing into the eyes of the audience. The heat pressed heavy on wet skin, making every breath sharp with chlorine. Jessica staggered back, her boots slipping against the slick platform, saltwater stinging her eyes until her vision blurred. Her wetsuit clung like ice against her body. The braid that had once looked crisp now plastered against her cheek. The air itself seemed to vibrate with fear, a thick scent of fish and sweat rising as thousands of people held their breath. Kaelen's massive body surged forward without hesitation, cutting the water with terrifying precision. The blast of spray from his momentum drenched the stage, and for the briefest moment, Jessica saw his jaws part, rows of sharp teeth flashing beneath the stadium lights. Then the impact came. His body struck with crushing force, a shockwave that rattled the metal beams overhead and sent Jessica sprawling backward, tumbling into the pool she had spent her career commanding. The crowd erupted, the shrill chorus of screams mixing with the first shrieking wail of alarms that had finally been triggered. The sound was overwhelming, chaos crashing from every side, but beneath the surface, silence took hold. Jessica's ears filled with the deafening thump of her own heartbeat. Her eyes opened wide against the sting of chlorinated water, searching the gloom. Kaelen's shadow slid into her vision, immense, unstoppable. Her body jerked as his teeth found the dive belt around her waist. The tug was brutal, pulling her down into the churning blue. Her lungs screamed for air, chest tightening with fire as she clawed against the water, arms flailing, legs kicking with frantic strength. Her hands struck only smooth skin, muscle and mass she could not move. Kaelen dragged her deeper, the tank walls spinning in a blur. Above, the surface fractured with streaks of red. At first, faint ribbons, then a bloom that spread wide beneath the light, curling and twisting like smoke. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but no one moved. Parents clutched their children, too frozen to flee, their horror mirrored in the rising voices of those who understood what they were seeing. Security guards shouted into radios. Whistles shrilled from the sides of the stage, but the water drowned it all, leaving Jessica alone in the suffocating silence. Her chest convulsed, her vision narrowed. The weight of the water pressed harder as she fought against the belt, her mind screaming for escape. Her braid floated around her face, green eyes wide with panic, lips clamped against the invading burn of water. She could feel her body weakening even as her arms kept swinging, striking against Kaelen's hold. Up above, a woman's scream tore sharper than the alarms. "She's not coming up." It carried over the chaos, shattering whatever illusion of performance remained. The crowd leaned forward, a sea of pale faces, each one transfixed by the nightmare unraveling before them. And still, the water bled red. The tank swallowed her whole. Walls of water pressed from every side, shimmering glass panes turning the world into a prison with no escape. Jessica kicked wildly, her legs cutting against the cold resistance, bubbles erupting from her mouth and racing upward in a frantic stream. The sting of chlorine burned her eyes, and the weight of the water crushed her chest, every second sharper than the last. Her lungs screamed for air. Kaelen's grip on her waist was unyielding. His jaws locked on the dive belt, dragging her in violent spirals that blurred the edges of her vision. Above, the stadium was chaos. Trainers hurled flotation buoys into the pool, their bright orange forms vanishing uselessly beneath the waves. Whistles shrilled in sharp bursts, echoing off steel and concrete, but the sound meant nothing in the tank's depth. Jessica clawed at the smooth expanse of Kaelen's flank, fingers slipping across rubbery skin, finding no purchase, no leverage against the tonnage of muscle holding her down. Her braid floated around her head like a rope, strands tangling across her face. With a surge of strength, she broke the surface for a heartbeat. Her mouth opened, a ragged cry splitting the arena, a sound of pure terror that carried across the bleachers. Children shrieked in answer, clutching at their parents as if that cry confirmed every nightmare blooming in their young minds. Then, with one powerful jerk, Kaelen dragged her back beneath the water. The tank reverberated with violence. His tail slammed against the walls, each strike sending vibrations rattling through the glass, shaking the steel framework that held the stands. The noise was deep and primal, a drumbeat that unsettled even those in the farthest rows. A mother buried her face against her child's hair, rocking instinctively as the sobs of children mingled with the rising chaos. Inside the pool, ribbons of crimson twisted outward, unfurling in the turquoise depths. The sight bled upward into the clear light of day, turning the water into a shifting canvas of blue and red. Jessica's green eyes widened as the last fragments of strength drained from her body. Her kicks slowed, her arms no longer sharp and frantic but heavy, sluggish, uncooperative. The cold seeped into her skin, deeper into her bones, until every movement felt stolen from her. She reached one last time, her fingers grazing the surface of the water above as though grasping for air, for life. But Kaelen's pull was relentless. The audience could only watch as her body was dragged back down, swallowed by the shadow that had once inspired awe. A hush fell over the stadium, a silence that was heavier than the screams before it. Jessica's fight slipped from her grasp, and in that suspended moment, surrounded by glass walls and blood-clouded water, the inevitable revealed itself. There was no choreography left, no performance, no illusion of safety, only reality. The stadium that had once roared with laughter and applause now felt like an empty shell. The floodlights still burned hot above the tank, their glare too bright, exposing everything in merciless detail. The shrill alarms had quieted to a low hum, a background drone that mixed with the muffled sobs of those who could not yet bring themselves to leave. The smell of chlorine hung heavy, but beneath it lingered something sharper, metallic, unmistakable, the scent of blood clinging to the humid air. Jessica's body was lifted from the water, her frame limp, her wetsuit torn at the waist where Kaelen's jaws had held her fast. Her skin, drained of color, gleamed pale beneath the unforgiving light. Paramedics rushed in, hands working with the urgency of instinct, but every motion seemed hollow, too late, too futile. A mask was pressed to her face. Compressions started, voices barked orders that cracked under the weight of desperation. But no rhythm returned, no spark came back. Each failed attempt carved silence deeper into the arena. On the surface of the pool, Kaelen circled slowly, his movements no longer frenzied, but deliberate, heavy. From his throat came a sound that silenced even the trainers, a low, guttural call that vibrated through the water. It rose into a mournful wail, long and resonant, echoing off the concrete walls. The sound was raw, alien yet piercingly familiar, like grief given voice. A ripple of unease swept the stands. Parents clutched their children tighter, shielding young eyes, though nothing could erase what they had already seen. Some turned away, others stood frozen, compelled to watch the creature that had shifted from performer to force of nature in the span of moments. Reporters pressed against the gates, microphones buzzing with fragmented words: attack, blood, trainer. Security barked commands, their radios crackling with static as they tried to hold back the surge of cameras. Trainers on the sidelines stood hollow-eyed, their hands trembling, their voices gone. For years they had trusted Kaelen, celebrated him as both partner and spectacle. Now they saw him differently, their faith splintered by the weight of what lay at the pool's edge. As dusk settled over San Diego, the stadium remained under a pall of shock. Families filed out slowly, their footsteps dragging, whispers carried in broken tones. Some children cried quietly into their parents' shoulders. Others asked questions that went unanswered. The arena, once filled with clapping hands and laughter, carried only echoes of alarms, of screams, of a cry from deep within the tank. And in the nights that followed, those echoes lingered. Kaelen circled alone in the water, his black and white form sliding beneath the floodlights. Again and again, he released the same low, mournful call, a sound that spread across the empty seats and through the silent park. To those who heard it, the sound was unmistakable. It was sorrow carved into the water, a haunting lament that would not fade. The boardroom where the decision was made was quiet, almost reverent, though the weight of the tragedy pressed down on every word spoken. No public announcement, no fanfare, only the certainty that things could not continue as they had. Behind closed doors, with faces pale under the glow of fluorescent lights, SeaWorld San Diego chose to let Kaelen go. There would be no more shows, no more music pulsing over the loudspeakers to disguise the cracks in trust. What remained was an animal, broken by captivity, who could no longer exist inside glass walls. The preparations began at dawn. The air smelled of salt, carried in from the Pacific, and the sharp bite of antiseptic that clung to the medical equipment lined neatly along the platform. Veterinarians moved carefully, their voices hushed as if speaking too loudly might unsettle the creature they were about to sedate. Kaelen floated listlessly at the water's edge, his breaths shallow bursts of mist, his dorsal fin cutting a lonely silhouette against the morning sky. The needle slid beneath his skin, the sedative easing into his veins. Slowly, his massive body grew still, his eye half closed yet watchful, as if he understood the shift that was coming. Cranes groaned as steel cables tightened, lifting his enormous frame into the air. The sound was industrial, metallic, a harsh contrast to the fragile silence surrounding the moment. Water streamed from his body in cascades, spattering against the concrete floor below, as handlers guided him carefully into the transport tank. The crowd that had gathered in, secret trainers, staff, a handful of officials stood in silence, their expressions unreadable. Some trembled. Others wiped at tears they didn't want to show. The journey to the coast stretched long. Hours of tense quiet, broken only by the rumble of the truck and the slosh of seawater inside the transport container. Jessica's absence was felt in every mile, a shadow in every silence. No one said her name aloud, but it hovered in the air, heavy as the salt wind pushing inland. At the shoreline, the ocean stretched vast and unbroken, its horizon washed in pale light. Waves rolled in steady rhythm, a sound both eternal and unfamiliar to the orca who had been caged for so long. The tank doors opened, creaking as steel shifted. For a moment, Kaelen lay still, his great body buoyed by the current, as if listening to something only he could hear. Then, with a sudden surge, he pushed forward, the water parting around him in white foam. He slid into the sea, disappearing beneath the surface with a grace that was both breathtaking and final. The handlers stood rooted in the sand, eyes fixed on the spot where he vanished. The only sound was the ocean's song, the rolling crash of waves and the whisper of water pulling back into itself. Jessica's laughter was gone. Her life ended within the cage of glass. Yet her presence lingered here, tethered to the lesson written in blood and silence. Back at SeaWorld, the tank stood empty. No cheers, no splashes, no rehearsed choreography, only the echo of alarms still etched in memory and the red stain of water that no one could wash away. The image remained, vivid and unyielding, a scar carried by every witness, the moment when joy turned to terror, when trust shattered in an instant. Kaelen's cries were swallowed now by the ocean's expanse, carried into the depths where they would blend with the endless songs of the sea. And though the world would move on, those who had been there would never forget. The stands are empty now, but the smell of salt and iron still clings to the damp concrete. A lone seagull circles above the silent tank, its cry sharp against the still air. The lights that once dazzled now cast long, cold reflections across the glass, as if the water remembers. Somewhere in that silence, you can almost hear the echo of a call, low and mournful, drifting where laughter used to be. A single ribbon of tape flutters on the railing, forgotten in the rush, its edges snapping softly in the breeze. It feels like a reminder that nothing built by us can hold nature forever. And if trust can vanish in an instant, what does it mean to cage what was never ours? If these echoes linger with you too, share the story, pass it on, and stay with us for more truths that should never be forgotten.